So yes, we have our July Wisdom Talk today. And first things first, you may have noticed when you arrived, we had two questions
screen. We can
on
try.
screen. Did
I don't know
anyone
which one that
not
is.
see them?
Because they told me it's only for Apple.
Couple of hands.
check.
So most of you hopefully have had a chance to discuss. Anyone want to shout out any superpowers that they feel they would want? Any wacky ideas that you discussed with your partner that you're like, this is really good? God, I see some.
Yeah, I'll take photos.
Yeah, can you share?
From behind you with the audience.
Okay, that's a common one actually. Any others? Any superpowers anyone want to talk about?
Is that okay for you?
Yes, please. Healing. Wow, that's incredible. So we have like a whole spectrum of superpowers from healing to teleporting. Yeah, the whole idea was really just to get people to talk.
It's
And we hope it's been actually fun to
1873.
get to know somebody hopefully that you
Enter.
haven't spoken to before. Today we're very fortunate to have Chaitanya Charan to join us. He's a mentor, a monk, and an internationally renowned speaker. And he's been a spiritual teacher for more than 25 years now. And in that time, he's actually authored more than 25 books that explain the relevance of Vedic wisdom texts in our modern lives today. He also has a Bhagavad-gita daily site where he shares wisdom from the Bhagavad-gita every day, and he's been doing this for many years. So he's someone who's been able to share this knowledge in a very applicable way to us. He has an incredible CV, being invited to events such as TEDx, UNESCO, Intel, Google, Microsoft. You can see the kind of caliber of places that he's been to, just to name a few. And he's spoken in over 100 cities in 4 continents every single year. So he spends about half the year traveling. So we're very fortunate to have him today to talk about battling the inner dialogue. So without further ado, we're going to hand over to him to take us through the session. Thank you.
Can you move it this side? Can you move this side also? Perfect, thank you. Am I audible to everyone? Thank you. So let's begin by taking a few deep breaths. Let's take 3 deep breaths. 1, 2. You can close your eyes if you like. 3. Let us recite, as we are breathing deeply, the sacred syllable Om. We'll recite it 3 times, and in the first recitation we'll focus on the first letter within it, A. So when you say Om, just focus on the long drawn A and try to draw it as long as possible. In the second, we will try to meditate on the U part, the second syllable within it, second sound within it. And then last, we'll try to meditate on the Ma. Although it's going to come later, we can anticipatory meditate on it. And in that way, we can try to immerse ourselves. So take a deep breath and let's draw out the Om as long as we can. A deep breath, and now we can try to meditate anticipatingly on the U intervening sound within the Om. Oh. A deep breath, and now we can anticipate the mer sound as we utter the Om. Thank you. I'm grateful to be here with all of you today. And our topic today is battling the inner dialogue. So I'll be using this as a whiteboard to write and draw certain things. When you hear the word inner dialogue, what does this mean to you? What thoughts come in your mind about it?
An inner voice, an inner chatter of thoughts, actually conflicting thoughts or any sort of thoughts. Some voice inside chattering, and telling you things.
Chatter of thoughts, and sometimes it may be conflicting.
Conflicting,
Yes. Thank you. Anything else? Yes, please.
The narrative commentary.
Sorry?
The narrative commentary.
The narrative commentary of the mind. What do you mean by the word narrative commentary? It's a constant, like an evaluation of what is happening. Yes. So, constantly when something is happening, we see someone, hey, this person looks attractive, this person looks strange, that's weird, this seems interesting, this is becoming monotonous. So there is a constant voice inside us that is evaluating and labeling and, broadly speaking, just chattering. Anything else? Yes? Self-judgment. Yes. There is a voice that is judging what we are doing, and based on that it's also eventually judging everything else that is happening, but definitely it's quite often can be a self-critical voice. Yes, thank you. Yes, please.
Searching and planning.
Searching.
Yeah, searching for the next thing to do, next pleasure to see, and planning the next thing.
Okay, so searching and planning. So this is something inside us which is doing this constantly. Yes, thank you. These are all valid points, valid ways of looking at the inner dialogue. So basically what we could focus on is the point that there is a world inside us, and that world is rarely a silent world. It is a world with sounds in it. Some of them are just noises, some of them are voices. So when I use, so if we consider the inner world, it's a noisy world. There are sounds inside it. There are noises and there are voices. So when both of these are there, the noises are more or less incoherent. The voices are coherent. Sometimes we just feel a dull sense of annoyance or boredom or irritation, and we may not be able to identify specifically what is causing it. So sometimes we just don't like someone, and we try to articulate, we just can't identify any particular reason why I don't like someone. I just don't like. I know one friend, he says, he was telling me, I like you and I don't like it that I like you. What he meant was that he had particular preconceptions about a particular person, and he said, you come from that place, you come from that group of people, I don't want to like you, but still the way you are behaving, I like you. So sometimes happens that sometimes the emotions that come up within us, sometimes we dislike someone, and it's like some people seem to like to dislike. See that? They just they look for reasons to be averse to others. So basically, there are noises which are, you could say, they are incoherent in the sense that we can't really articulate why we feel that way. And voices, they are a little bit coherent. Now, coherent does not necessarily mean that they are cogent, that they are speaking something. Whether what they are speaking is right, whether it's logical, whether it's reasonable, that's a different thing. But it's very much there. So for me, this whole dynamic of the inner world with the inner voices became apparent about 30 years ago when my spiritual journey actually took off thereafter. So how do we move? Okay, keep moving like this. Okay. I'm used to a Samsung tablet, so I only eat apples. So I was born and brought up in India. India is an extremely education conscious or educational achievement conscious country. Since my childhood, my dream in life was to be the number one in my class, and I was always good in my studies. So in my third year of engineering, I gave the GRE exam for going for higher studies to America. I had a maternal uncle who owned his own company in America, and he didn't have any successors for that company. So he wanted me to come over there. And Indians generally are very good at math and analysis, but sometimes in English we tend to struggle. For me, since my childhood, words were my favorite thing. One of my favorite hobbies in childhood was just to pick up a dictionary and memorize words. So I did very well in English also. At that time when I gave GRE, I came not just first in my class, not just first in my college, I was first in the history of my college. I was first in the entire university, which had several millions of students overall. So I was elated, on top of the world. But after some time I realized, okay, looking at the mark sheet doesn't give so much happiness. It's only when someone else congratulates and praises that there is some happiness. So, of course, I was a celebrity for some time in my college. The whole university knew about it, and so many people came to congratulate me. But somehow, it happened that 3 of my friends, one after another, forgot to congratulate me. Maybe they thought that everybody knows about it. What is the big deal? So when okay, any idea what happened here? Which one? This one? Yeah. Okay. And how do we delete if we write? Okay. Okay, fine. Okay. Mm. So, when oh wow. Okay, it's not working. It's just disappeared. Did you do something? Okay. It's just becoming a straight line in the corner. It's fine. Sorry about this. I think it's taking it in a handwriting mode or something like that. Okay. You fix it and get it back to me and continue a little. So anyway, when the first person didn't congratulate me, I felt annoyed. When the second person didn't congratulate me, I felt irritated. When the third person didn't congratulate me, I felt enraged. So I just keep pushing it down, just quickly. So I just keep pushing it down.
Yeah, with one finger.
With one finger.
Yeah.
Okay. Fine, thank you. So anyway, so this trajectory went down. I felt enraged, and here I was, and I didn't want to sound pathetic. I couldn't very well ask that friend, why are you not congratulating me? But at that time, when I was feeling just so miserable, it is almost as if I had an out-of-body experience. I felt as if I was looking at myself from above. And something inside me said, hey, wait a minute. You thought that by becoming successful academically, by being praised by everyone, you would be happy. But instead of being happy, you have actually become more dependent for your happiness on others. And I started thinking, what actually is going on over here? So, there was a voice inside me which was going downward, saying, going from annoyed to irritated to enraged. But, so while this voice was enraged, this voice was analytical, was introspective. And it was saying, what exactly is going on over here? And that was the time when I started diving into my inner world, trying to understand what actually goes on over there. What would actually lead to satisfaction and fulfillment? That's when I was introduced, or rather reintroduced to the Bhagavad-gita. Everybody in India is introduced to the Bhagavad-gita in their childhood. But that introduction is mostly as a book of official piety. In our childhood, we learn a few verses and it's like showing our piety to others. But here, I was reintroduced to it as a book of wisdom. And one of the verses from the Gita, which I found most transformative for me, which I keep finding it as transformative, is 6.5 in the Gita. So, Uddharedatmanatmanam natmanam avasadayet atmaiva yatmano bandhur atmaiva ripuratmanaha. So this verse says that if we consider the self, there is a lower self and there is a higher self. And it says that we need to elevate ourselves with ourselves, not degrade ourselves with ourselves. So the idea is that this can go upwards or this can go downwards. Because I say don't go downwards, go upwards. And the important thing that it is saying, this, if you forget everything from this session, the next diagram is probably the one thing if you can carry home, you will have got something tangible. We all want to become better, we want the world to treat us better, but we all know in a part of us that I also need to become better. So becoming better, there are two visions, two conceptions. One is where the higher self goes upward and the lower self goes downward. What that means is, there is a part of us which is kind and virtuous and polite and helpful, and that becomes higher and better. But at the same time, the lower self is there. And while the higher self is elevated, the lower self is buried. So there is anger and resentment and irritation inside me, but I'm burying it deep inside. So if somebody wants to have greater self-discipline, that self-discipline doesn't come in this case by self-transformation, it comes by self-suppression. One part of me, I develop such an ironclad control over myself that no matter how much anger I feel, there's not one word of expression that will come out. So, inside we may be irritated, we may be frustrated, or we may have certain cravings which we are trying to give up. But those cravings have gone deep inside and they're buried inside. And at a surface level, we act as if, oh, I am free from that. I have gone way above that. Now, this state is like a tension. When there is a rubber band, and if we pull it too much, it can pull, but it cannot be pulled too much. When it is pulled too much, eventually it will snap back, or it will just break. So that's in this stage, it becomes like a extended rubber band. So this is not a healthy way of growing. Just like a rubber band will either snap or snap back or break. So like that, there's a relapse, we go back to our older ways, or there is a collapse where the person just becomes emotionally dysfunctional. Now, actual growth, healthy growth, what the Gita is saying is that the higher self goes up, but the lower self also goes up. So it's to depict this in one short diagram to illustrate what this means. Say, if there is a higher self within me and a lower self within me. Now, one way of growing is the higher self goes up, the lower self goes down. The other is that both the higher self and the lower self go up, and also you will say they become closer. Now this journey may not be up to this much, they may just both come slightly up. But this is a person who is well integrated. This is a person who is on the verge of disintegration. And now to some extent, there are always going to be the higher and the lower self within us. Sometimes people are rude with us, and there's a part of us which wants to be rude towards them. Now, being cultured, being civilized, means that we do restrain that part. And that's why the point is that the lower self doesn't ever disappear. However, so what happens is, to give an illustration of these two differences. Before I was introduced to the active practice of spirituality, I used to have quite a bit of anger issues. I was normally very polite and friendly, but sometimes I would just snap. I would become very aggressive. And like I mentioned earlier, I was good at words, and that was not good for me. Because if you are good at words, some people become angry and they just sputter and spatter and they just can't speak anything. Some people, when they become angry, they start using their tongue like a sword. And if they are good at speaking, then that is really bad for them. Because they will speak such hurtful words at that time, it can be terrible. So I was trying very much to control my anger. And I found, after I started practicing spirituality, chanting the holy names of the Lord, remembering the Lord, reorienting my life around bhakti, my anger dramatically disappeared. And I felt so happy. But after about 5 to 7 to years, I started finding that the anger started resurfacing. So when we start practicing spirituality, many of our lower tendencies seem to disappear. But quite often, by the novelty of the practice of spirituality and the joy of experiencing something higher, that lower part has been buried inside. It has not been removed. It has not been raised. So there would be times when I would just get angry. So when this lower self remains, there's a time when it remains buried. When it remains buried, this phase, and everything seems to be nice. Oh, I'm just growing up. I'm not just growing in my spirituality, I'm rocketing up in my spirituality. So this I call the honeymoon phase of our spirituality. So, it's like in a relationship, in the honeymoon phase, we just come to know the other person and it's so exciting. Similarly, here, it seems, oh, my lower side, darker side has just disappeared. And then, when it starts resurfacing, we start getting disturbed. Was my whole spirituality just a show? Or is it that this spirituality doesn't work at all? So it could be that we start thinking the spirituality doesn't work for me, or it doesn't work at all. Either way, we start rethinking ours. And there's nothing wrong with this rethinking. This is just natural. So the sustainable way to grow is that both the lower self and the higher self go upwards. So to give another example of this point, say if there is anger, then when the lower self is being buried, what is buried comes out either by exploding or by leaking. Exploding means there is one destructively violent episode of anger where some person does something small and then we explode because of the 1111 things that we had suppressed inside us. And leaking means it comes out as intermittent short bursts of passive aggressive behavior. It's not violently aggressive, but it's just that we ourselves can't predict how am I going to behave. So the lower self has not been integrated. And a superficial understanding of spirituality is that we just bury the lower self and we move on with life. But the Gita clearly says, elevate yourself with yourself. So the self here refers to elevate your lower self with your higher self. Don't let your lower self degrade your higher self. So don't go downwards fully, but we have to take our lower self upward with us. So this inner chatter that we started talking about was all about understanding that these are the two voices inside us, and those voices, they keep surfacing intermittently and they need to be addressed appropriately. So I'll talk about 3 principles for addressing these, and I'll use the acronym ACT. The lower self is itself not necessarily a bad thing. The lower self is just an unhealthy or outdated way of responding to life's challenges. So, A is accept. Accept that this lower self does exist. And foundational to understanding this is the idea of the lower self. Many of you probably know about this model of the self. It's a 3-level model. There is the body, the mind, and the spiritual side of it, the soul. Now, within the mind, there are impressions. These impressions are called as, in Sanskrit, as samskaras. Now, samskara, you can translate this as some scars. Everyone has some or the other scar. We're all scarred in some ways. And now, how do we know what are the samskaras that we have? Say, if one were behind me right now, and they wanted to draw my attention, and they just tap on my shoulder. Say, it's tap on my shoulder. Ah! If I scream, say, what happened? I just tapped you. And they say, actually, I had a sprain over here. So, if you touch me, it is very sensitive. So, the idea is, when there is a samskara, it's like a scar, it's like a wound. So, normally, if there is a particular, okay, it went off again. Sorry?
Yeah, change it in the so
This one?
the next one.
Done? Okay. So normally if there is a stimulus, like say, okay, you touch, and there is a proportionate response. Yeah, what can I do for you? So this is normal. But when there is a wound, there is a stimulus and there is a huge response. So when there is a small stimulus and a large response, that indicates that there is something abnormal over here. So we also speak this sometimes in our normal language. Have I touched a nerve over here? So if we speak something, the other person tends to get upset. Have I touched a nerve? Generally, the nerves are the parts of our body where there's maximum sensation. Little touch also causes pain. So for us, we all have some emotional scars within us. And the way we know those scars is that whenever there is some touch over there, whenever there's a stimulus, if any stimulus is triggering a disproportionate response, that indicates that's where some scar is there. So for example, consider somebody who has an addiction issue. Then somebody might pass by a bar, and if they have never drunk, they are not interested in drinking, they notice the bar and they just move on with life. It doesn't register with them. But for somebody else, when they see a bar, it's almost like a bar has come in their path. They just can't go ahead. I have to go in here right now. So they may be talking with someone. While they're talking, so they may be talking even with their boss, and suddenly their boss body changes into the bottle shape. I need to drink right now. So just the perception of a bottle or a bar or someone drinking just triggers an overwhelming desire within them. So that's a samskara. Now samskaras can manifest in many ways, but the scars primarily result in desire or fear. Of course, in between is anger. The Gita talks about these three as the primary challenges of the mind. So this is where most of the fads of life come in: fear, anger, desire. Twice the Gita talks about Vita, Raga, Bhaya, Krodha. That if some stimulus triggers too much anger, too much desire, too much fear within us, that's an indication that we have some samskara. So that's their lower self over there. So now, say, what has happened if somebody touches me and it feels I scream? Now what might happen is that right now there is a sprain, and therefore if anybody touches, it's very sensitive. But suppose the pain has healed. Still, there is the lingering memory of the pain. And thereafter, if somebody touches, still what happens? Oh, there's pain over there. So here, what exactly is happening is, the response which was there, that response has outlived its utility. In the past, if I was walking along and my shoulder brushed against somebody, it was painful. Now, it may no longer be painful. But still, I wince every time I pass by a wall. So I'm talking about two different situations. One is where the scar is still a wound, and the second is the scar is like a live wound. Second is when it's not a wound anymore. So in both situations, in first situation, it's a desired response. Okay, I don't want to be hurt. In the second, it's more of a reflex that is going wrong. It is no longer needed. So for all of us, whether it is fear, desire, anger, the lower self from where it emanates, it's not a bad thing. Okay, it's not a bad thing in the sense that it is just a reaction that is outdated, or it is unneeded now. So our mind, based on the impressions, will keep going in that direction. So for example, say someone, whenever they get bored, their default was, okay, let me drink. Let me feel some high. Let me get some dopamine hit through drinking. Now maybe they have come to spirituality. They've learned more about how through spiritual sound, through meditation, through reflection, through musical meditation, they can get a high. They can, whenever you feel down, okay, just listen to some soothing, uplifting spiritual music. Feel so much better. So that response is available. But the mind, based on its past conditionings, the past impressions, still goes, okay, whenever I feel bored, let me drink. Whenever I feel bored, okay, let me watch some TV. Whenever I feel bored, let me just go to social media and look at this, look at that. So that part of us which prompts us in particular directions, that part is not bad. Maybe in the past, for us, the real solution to boredom was drinking. Now, of course, we could say it's a cure that is going to lead to further problems. That's okay, but it was a response. So the lower self needs understanding, not burying. Okay? So first I said acknowledge means, yeah, this is a part of me and it has a valid reason for being there. Some of the valid reasons we might be able to understand, some of the reasons we may not be able to understand right. But in our psyche are many different forces, and what their specific origin is not very important. But they are there for some reason. Is that reason valuable now? Maybe not. So acknowledge its presence. So if we feel some irrational fear, if we feel some irrational anger, if we feel some irrational desire, we may know all this is unnecessary, all this is not good, all this is just pointless. Okay, it is there. It is there because it served some need for me. Maybe it served it in a bad way, but it served the need. So acknowledge that. Accept its presence. And what is the acronym we were discussing? ACT. Yes, thank you. Now, after that is C is counter. So basically, if we consider the lower self and the higher self, let's put it as two persons over here. So this is the higher self and this is the lower self. But quite often in actual conversations, the higher self becomes lower and the lower self takes a more domineering position. That means its voice becomes louder. So sometimes it happens that inside there is this, the lower self's voice is very strong. The higher self's voice is very small. So there's one part of us saying, get back at that person, put them in their place. Other part of us saying, no, instead of putting them in their place, maybe I should put myself in their place. Maybe I should understand why they are so angry with me. But that part is lower. Now, after some time, it may even happen. So, this is a dialogue that is going on, but this is an unhealthy dialogue, in the sense that one person is dominating, and not only is it dominating, it is actually the darker part of us which is dominating. After some time, it may happen that the higher self just becomes silent, and then the only voice is the lower self. So the inner dialogue becomes a monologue. Now, at a very dark level, this is the state where people become sociopaths or psychopaths. See, we all, when we do something that hurts others, there's a part of us which tells us, hey, I shouldn't do this. Say, if I'm going on a crowded road and if I step on someone, then, as soon as I realize I stepped on someone, I'm sorry. But imagine someone, they're walking along, they see they've stepped on someone, they look at the face of that person, and they deliberately raise their foot and stamp it on the other person. And the other person screams, and they get a sadistic smile on their face. So, the part of them from inside should tell, hey, this is not a good thing. That part has died. It's almost died. That part has become silent. So this is a very deadly state to be in. But what has happened? The inner dialogue has become a monologue, and not only an unhealthy monologue, but a deadly monologue. Where the person is doing something bad, and there is no one from inside telling them that this is a bad thing. How many of you believe that people are basically good? Okay. How many of you believe that people are basically bad? Wow. Okay, we can say people are basically bad, but I am not. Except for me. Now, there is a part of us, a significant part of us, which would genuinely like to believe that people are basically good. But we all, if we just have some experience in life, we see that there are people who are bad. Not only do they do bad things, but they seem to not even feel bad about doing bad things. They seem to get joy in hurting others. Have anyone encountered a person like that? Okay. If you are not, I would say you are fortunate and unfortunate both. You are fortunate that you have not encountered a person like that, but it's unfortunate because if we have never encountered somebody who gets joy in hurting others, and then we encounter that person, it's very difficult to reconcile that with our view of the world. So the point is, there are a few people like this, not many, but there are few people whose inner voice is just a monologue. Now for many of us, it may also be there, but it may be regarding a particular thing. Some people may be very polite and nice in one area, but they may be very nonchalant in some other area. Some people may be principled in one thing, but they're completely unprincipled in something else, and they don't even hesitate about it. They don't even think twice about it. So that all that complexity is there. But first point is, after we accept that there is this inner voice within me, which is the lower self. Now the lower self sometimes starts speaking. When it starts speaking, it is important for us to counter its voice. Now how do we counter it? So this is where, to counter the voice, basically, if the lower self is telling us, come on, eat this, watch this, touch this, shout at this person, come on, life is terrible, all kinds of negative things, unhelpful things it is saying. So we need to counter primarily with our intelligence. So that's where, if we associate with good people, we hear wisdom, then we have some answers. When our mind starts going on a dark track. So if somebody is struggling with an addiction, and they decide, I will not do this, I will not do this, and somehow they have a relapse. And then a part of it they may say, okay, see, you are just not worth it. You won't be able to do it. You are worthless. You are lost. Just give up. So we may fall a little bit, but sometimes just sink into it. All of us, we will experience loss in life. This is just the experience. This is just the, you could say this is more the event. Okay, what happened? How did this change? Okay, this is loss as an event. But how we experience the loss, how we interpret the loss. So at objective level, I have lost. Okay, I tried this relationship, I tried this job, I tried this project, I made this resolution, I have lost. Now, a little more negative would be, I am lost. So this is, you could say, the higher self-evaluation of it. But the most damaging would be, I am a loser. This is the voice of the lower self speaking. So this is where, if somebody starts thinking that I am a loser, then nobody wants to be with a loser. So if we feel that we are in a relationship with somebody who's a loser, we want to just lose that person. You get lost. But if we start thinking I am a loser, and we have to be with ourselves, this is where people start getting depressed, people start getting inferiority issues, and we may even become suicidal. So loss is an event, but how we interpret it, that depends on whether it's the lower self speaking or the higher self speaking. So when we hear spiritual wisdom as given in the Bhagavad-gita, by that we learn that there is a core to us which is pure, which is spiritual, which is indestructible. Yes, in our mind there may be many scars, many dark things may emerge from that scarred mind. But the higher self is still existing, it still has power. So there is intelligence. We need intelligence to counter the voice of the lower self. And intelligence alone, however, is not enough. We need association. At those times, when the lower self's voice is becoming very, very strong, at that time, we need somebody outside who will remind us, hey, things are not that bad. Things will be all right. They will remind us, not just give us some encouragement, but they'll also equip our intelligence, give us some wisdom. So we need to be able to counter that. That's why these two things, studying Gita and coming in, not just an association for a session, but actually making friends with others who are like-minded, especially those who can be our spiritual guides. That's very important. So that's the second part. We counter. The lower self will be there. We accept that it exists, but we don't accept its narrative. We don't accept its interpretation. Yeah, you are feeling hurt, you are feeling lonely, you are feeling this craving, but that does not necessarily mean that you have to do this thing. There is an alternative, there is a better way. So that brings us to the last part. What is the last in the acronym? T. T is transform. So this is based on 270 in the Gita. So 270 is one of the most visually evocative metaphors in the Gita. What it says is that if our consciousness is like a puddle, then if a flowing river comes into it, it looks like, not a river, but assume it is. It's a river comes up over there. So then the puddle will be completely overflown, it will be devastated. But if our consciousness is like a large ocean, and then the same river comes into it, not much is going to happen. So, what does this mean practically? The transformation here is in the size of our consciousness. So we transform ourselves by expanding our consciousness. And our consciousness expands based on the kind of desires that we have there, the kind of aspirations we have over there. The lower self is still there, but the higher self has a higher longing, a higher aspiration, a higher understanding. So when we pray, when we chant, when we meditate, we connect with the divine. We bring the divine into our consciousness. And when the divine enters into our consciousness expands. We experience inner contentment, we experience inner enrichment. Say, if we are at home, I'll give two examples and conclude this talk. Say, if we are at our home and we are maybe reading a book and we are happy reading the book, maybe we are talking with our family and we are content. And say at that time a friend calls and says, hey, let's go for a party, let's drink. I'll say, no, not now. I'm happy here. But say we are at home and we are bored, we have turned on the TV, there seems to be nothing interesting on TV, and we don't even feel sleepy, and somebody calls, let's go for a party. Oh yeah, I was wondering where there's a party now, let's go. So if there is inner emptiness, then any external temptation just pulls us. But if there's inner fullness, then external temptations won't pull us. So this transformation happens when we connect ourselves with the divine. So when we are doing meditation, the last metaphor I'll give to conclude this point, I suppose. So meditation, what exactly is meditation? Meditation is both going in and taking in. That's when we hear the sacred sounds, at that time, in one sense, we are taking in the sacred sound. So, say if we utter the Hare Krishna mantra, so we are taking in that sound. That's a part of meditation. So, in meditation, we are taking in a stimulus that will calm us, that will shelter us, that will satisfy us, that will strengthen us. But as we keep taking in that stimulus, we start understanding that actually this is not something which I take in. This is something far bigger than me. This is something that takes me in. This is something that I immerse myself in. So this transformation, to depict it visually, normally for us, say the world is big and the divine is small. Yeah, there is a divinity within me, there is a divinity above me, all that is a reality, but it's somewhere there, far away. But it's not relevant. But when this transformation happens, when we regularly do spiritual practices like meditation, then this dynamic changes. The world becomes small and the divine becomes big for us. And when this happens, then the world's ups and downs, they don't shake us so much. And at this particular point, when the divine has become bigger than the world, at this point, our internal becomes like the ocean. So when we are doing our spiritual practices, at that time, for at least a few moments, we need to immerse ourselves in the divine. So we'll be uttering the mantra many times. We'll be trying to do our meditational practices many times. And that's good to do it as a discipline. But during that time, we cannot afford to let it all be just a ritual. At least for a few moments, we try to bring our consciousness into the experience of a reality far bigger than the world around us. Oh, this person said like this, and I made a mess of this, and the world is a mess. Okay, all that may be true. But there is a reality bigger than this. And I am a part of that bigger reality. So when by taking in, we start going in. By going in, we start taking in more and more. We enter us into that higher awareness. That awareness that there is a higher reality, that my higher self is a part of a much bigger self. So to conclude this, that we talked about that stretching, that when we grow, the higher self can be going up and the lower self can be going down. Or the higher self and the lower self, both can be going up. So in bhakti, we don't just depend on our willpower. I will not do this. Rather, we take shelter of divine power. So it's like this higher self. So from here, there is my higher self and lower self. So when this goes up, so at this time we understand above us there is this divine self. There is divinity. And when our higher self links with divinity, then we get pulled upwards. So when we are doing meditation, it's not just a passive thing. Okay, there's some object or there's some sound, I'm meditating on it. That sound is the divine, and the divine is drawing us upwards. And thus we'll find that our entire self will get uplifted. And this is where the inner dialogue will become healthy. This is where our higher self will not suppress the lower self, but will be able to acknowledge and counter as required, and eventually take the higher self upwards, take the lower self upwards. So I'll summarize. So it might seem to be a lot of concepts, but I'll try to summarize what we discussed today. So I discussed 4 main points. The first point we discussed was about inner growth. 2 distinct conceptions of inner growth. One is that if we are growing, there's one part of us which goes upward, another part of us which goes downwards. Higher self goes up, lower self goes down. So this is unsustainable. The other is where the higher self and the lower self both go up. This is what the Gita is recommending in 16.5. So when you talk about the inner voices, we don't want to silence and suppress the inner voices. We want to raise both of them. And then how to go about doing this? I talked about 3 distinct points. What is the acronym? ACT. A was accept. Accept that the lower self is just basically an outdated response, outdated reaction to a need. Some need was there. So for example, boredom, the past resolution was to drink. So I discussed the idea of samskara. We all have samskara, and the test of samskara is there's a small stimulus, there's a large reaction. So wherever there is, okay, acknowledge it. This urge will come within me. I don't have to deny it. I don't have to suppress it. Okay, it's a part of me. But accept does not mean we listen to it. It means we accept its existence. And then we counter its narrative. Okay, whenever I feel bored, I feel lonely, one part of me says, okay, nobody cares. Life is terrible. Everything is doomed. But we counter it. And for this countering, because we have intelligence, and then we have association. And the last T is transform. So when we transform, what do? Essentially through meditation. So meditation is both taking in and going in. First we take in the divine sound, and gradually we enter into that divine sound. We enter into the divinity that is manifest through the sound. When we get transformed, then what happens? All the world and its wounds and scars, it seems so big and the divine seems so small, that whole thing changes. The world becomes small and the divine becomes big. This is the time when our consciousness becomes like an ocean. And the lower self may be there, but the lower self won't hurt us anymore. This is where our inner dialogue will become healthy. It won't be an unhealthy dialogue, it won't be an unhealthy or deadly monologue, but this is the lower self and the higher self will both be elevated, not just by the power of our willpower, but by the grace of the divine. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Are there any questions or comments? Yes, please.
With sanskars that are so deep rooted, sometimes from past births even, where that really resurface so much, and then we do the japa, we do the chanting, we do the meditation and the devotion. Despite all that you said, that it still resurfaces. So is there a cure for that, or is that a constant? It's not a battle, but is that something that will resurface because of our karma, maybe, or is it because of maybe a repetitive sort of pattern that develops, and that we have to then come out of that victim mode and not be in that repetitive cycle of that churning of thoughts?
That's true. So that's why I didn't say that japa or meditation is the first step. It's transform is the last. Counter is not directly to spirituality. It is with intelligence and association. Now, of course, our intelligence could be equipped through spiritual wisdom. That is fine. But it is at an intelligence level. So, basically, when, say for example, if I get a fracture, see, it's very helpful to treat the mind just like the body. So, what does it mean? Say, if I got a fracture. Now, sometimes, or if I got a sprain and the sprain degenerated further. So, now sometimes I may remember, oh, that particular time I slipped and I fell and that's how I got a sprain. Sometimes I may not even remember. How did I get this sprain? I just suddenly one day I started feeling the pain and it's there. Okay, if we can find the cause, well and good. Even if we can't find the cause, there is a way to cure. So, sometimes what happens is, if there is a wound, the wound for the body, the wound for the mind. Now, we could go in the past to find the cause. That's okay, but what is much more important is to focus on the future and the cure. That's much more important. If we go to the past, well, if I can find out what caused the fracture, that's good, but if I can't, it doesn't matter. So, sometimes in trying to heal the wounds of the past, we can get consumed by the past itself. So, that's not very healthy. So, what do? We basically need to delink the mind. See, the mind is like a computer program, you could say. And computer program, this input, this output, it's like that. So, basically, what we need to do is, the mind has this idea. Oh, say somebody is an addict, or somebody has PTSD. Let's take that as an example. So then maybe in a previous life they were trapped underground and they were buried and they died. It's very ghastly thing, but suppose. And that's why now this time they have some claustrophobia. They can't get into an elevator, they can't go into a dark basement or a cellar or whatever. Just have that fear. So what happens exactly is that the mind starts going on a spiral of wild fear. So the solution here is the stimulus, and there is going to be a wild response. So in fracture, what do? First is no motion. Okay, if you got a fracture, put your hand in the sling. Don't move it at all. Then after that, there is slow, steady motion, the regular and regulated. So Krishna, in talking about healing of the mind, talks about these two things, Vairagya and Abhyasa. So these can be translated in many different ways, but in this context what it means is, if initially something is agitating us too much, whether it is by fear, whether it is by desire, whether it is by anger, so avoid it. Keep a distance from it. Vairagya. Keep a distance from it. But after that, gradually there is an exposure. So okay, you can't get into an elevator. Okay, that elevator is about 15 feet away. Can you go 10 feet closer to the elevator? Okay, 10 feet is possible. One more? No, not. Okay, that's fine. That much is good enough for today. Next day, try to go 9 feet. Try to go 8 feet. So basically, the mind has created an imagination that if I enter into the elevator, I'll die. But over a period of time, as this gradual exposure, you start realizing, okay, the mind's dystopian imagination does not come true. So it requires regular and regulated exposure. So now how important is it to do this? It depends on how troubling that particular memory is for us, that particular wound is for us. So there is a practical way to deal with it, and there is a transcendental or spiritual way to deal with it. Spiritually, we just connect with the divine and we go beyond the impressions. So say in some things, just the divine becomes so big that the world doesn't matter so much. But in some things, in some cases, that may not happen immediately.
That's Vairagya then, isn't it? You're actually you're living in the material world, but then you're
Well, you could say that, but it's not so much one is indifferent to the world. It is that we still act in the world, we act in the world for the sake of God. We want to work in the world, and we want to do the best things in the world. We want to offer the best things for the divine. See, the divine has given us abilities, not just so that we neglect or reject the abilities. They're all meant to be used. But they are not used when the world is the goal. That means this, I want to become famous, I want to become popular. That's the most important thing. But through my abilities, I want to connect with the divine. So if I have singing ability, I will sing. And if I become famous, that's good. But even if I don't become famous, if I can sing and sing something spiritual and connect with the divine and inspire others to connect with the divine, maybe one person or 10 people, doesn't matter. And that's the most important thing. So Vairagya is not so much turning away from the world. It is more of turning away from the spell of the world on us. The world is the most important thing. No, it is not. The divine is much more important than the world. Okay? Thank you. Yes. So thank you very much for your kind participation. Hare Krishna.
Wanted to reiterate with that round of applause. So thank you for Chaitanya Charan to give us that time to take us through some wisdom in terms of how we battle our inner dialogue. It's said that when we hear something, we only retain about 30% of that. But actually when we start to meditate, Chaitanya Charan was just talking about there's two aspects, going in and then taking in. So in order to go in, I just want to encourage you to just take a moment right now, reflect on what it is that you've taken away from today's session and just internalize that. So just give you a moment. What is the one thing that you're going to take away from today's session? So whilst you meditate on that, I'll just share something that struck me, what's resonated with me. Chaitanya Charan was talking about understanding that inner voice and how we can become more aware, whether it's the higher self or the lower self. And one of the really nice ways to understand, as he mentioned, is when we understand what our triggers are and what's the response to that. Is it proportionate or is it disproportionate? We can start to understand where I'm situated in that. That's something I'm taking away. Hopefully there's something that you've also taken away. And in terms of, so that was going in, we'll also do some taking in. So now what we're going to do is have some kirtan. So for those of you who have not participated in kirtan before, this is where we do some sound meditation. Again, something that Chaitanya Charan mentioned. And I just really encourage you to absorb yourself and give it a go. Sometimes we tend to be averse to trying something new, but actually when we do, we can actually get a lot from it. So with that, I'll invite the kirtan team to come on stage, and we'll do some kirtan, and then I'll share some announcements at the end. Thank you. stage?
I'll come down.